Hello, everybody. My name is Scott Stanfield. I am the modern longevitarian, and welcome to today's show. Today is Friday, December 18th, and I'm super excited. I really am super excited because the guest today is actually, from a distance, been a mentor of mine when it comes to living the best life. And you guys know my story about how my parents both had cancer, both at age 55, a couple of years apart, because Dad's older than mom, and so Dad had prostate cancer, had to go through chemo and surgery and all those things, and is 72 now. Mom turned 70 in April. So I'm blessed to have them here in my life. And so this has been a big part of my life is really looking at how to extend my health span or the best years of my life out for decades. And so I'm super excited about this interview. But before we get there, I want to say thanks for people who've already commenting on the show, at sending in questions for Dr. Brownstein. And so this is going to be a super, super fun episode. Also, I want to mention, because I want to say welcome to people watching Spirituality Gone Wild, part of the Spirituality Gone Wild network. And so part of the Spirituality Gone Wild network, we here we are streaming on 6 different places on Facebook, and also we're welcome all the people watching on LinkedIn. So if you got any questions along the way, feel free to put them in the comments, and I'll be happy to squeeze them in the show as we see fit as we go through. But anyway, part of Spirituality Gone Wild has this Untamed Club, and the Untamed Club, there's a link in the comments. You can go down and click on that, and that's basically for $22 a month. There's over 20 co-creators just like me that have these 5-day courses that you can tap into, and for 1 month, each month that you're a member, you get one of these 5-day courses for free. So there'll be things on emotional intelligence, on the life lessons from the movie Forrest Gump from Steve Weber, of the host of the American Gumption Morning Show. And then, of course, I'm going to put in a modern longevitarian 5-day course as well. This will be coming soon. So without any further ado, I want to bring in Dr. Brownstein and welcome him to the show. He is not only a best-selling author, he's also a board-certified family physician and one of the foremost practitioners of holistic medicine. He's a medical director of the Center of Holistic Medicine in West Bloomfield, Michigan. He's lectured internationally to physicians, and also about his success using natural hormones and natural therapies in his practice. And so I wanted to make sure I got his intro correct. And so here we go, Dr. Brownstein. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. Let me change this one thing here. There we go. And so, gosh, I think you're at 16 or 17 books now that you've written on health.
The 16th book is just coming out right now.
Okay. And what's the title on that one?
The title of that one is A Holistic Approach to Viruses. And it's the treatment I've been using to treat my patients who are suffering from coronavirus. But it's the same treatment we've been using for 20 plus years on people with influenza and other flu-like illnesses.
Right. So no difference in any of that stuff, right?
No difference. And just like they respond well with flu and influenza-like illnesses, the people suffering with coronavirus have responded well when you get their immune system working better.
Okay. That's amazing. Before we get into all of that stuff, I wanted to ask you, because you have a super interesting story. I mean, you wanted to be a family physician even as a child growing up, right?
That's correct. I wanted to model myself after my family doctor, who I didn't see that often. I grew up in a conventional household. We didn't question anything the doctor told us. We didn't go much. We went when we were sick, and we took what the doctor said to take. and we weren't a holistic household. We didn't take any vitamins. And, but, I had asthma growing up as a child, so I saw the doctor maybe a little bit more than my friends, but I was relatively, healthy. And I decided I want to be a doctor my whole life. So geared my undergraduate training at the University of Michigan to get into medical school, went to Wayne State School of Medicine in Detroit, and then did a residency in suburbs of Detroit and started practicing conventional medicine just like I was taught. And thought that's what I wanted to do for the next 30 to 40 years. And then about 6 months into that, things changed. And what changed was my father was sick all the time I was growing up. He had his first heart attack at 40, his second heart attack at 42. He had, over the next 20 years, he had two bypass surgeries and numerous angioplasties. He was on, when I finished my medical training and finished my residency, he was on 12 different medications to control blood pressure, blood sugar, hypertension, and he was miserable. He had suffered from continual angina for over 20 years. He was popping nitroglycerin pills like they were candy, and he looked terrible. He looked pale and pasty. I was waiting for the phone call that he had died suddenly. We were all waiting for the phone call that he had died suddenly. And my turning point came about 6 months into practicing conventional medicine when I was working for one of my partners right now. And he, I thought I was, doing fine. And I was negotiating in a buy-in for a partnership at the end of a year. And, all of a sudden I get up from work one day, or get up from sleeping one day, and when we're getting ready to go to work, my wife and I just blurt out to my wife, Allison, I don't want to be a doctor anymore. And, she stops and turns and says to me, what's wrong with you? What's wrong? And I said, I don't know, but this is not fun. Patients aren't getting better. I'm just using these drugs that are treating their symptoms, and I'm using more drugs to treat the side effects from the first drugs. And, I can't do this for the next 30 to 40 years. And she said, well, why don't you do another residency? And I'm like, I'm not doing another residency. One was enough. And they're all the same. And she said, what are you going to do about it? And I really didn't know at that point. But I had gone a couple of nights without sleeping, leading up to that for an unknown reason. So, that day I go to work, then I tell her that, and I happen to see a male patient whose wife works with my wife. They used to drive to downtown Detroit, and they were both lawyers, and they worked together. And, this was a patient who we'd gone out with, and he was bothering me to, meet his chiropractor. And, I didn't want to meet a chiropractor at that time. I never knew one, never went to one. I thought they were dangerous. I used to tell my patients don't go, even though I never knew what they did or never met one before. And so, I saw him that day, and, he said it again, you should meet my chiropractor. He's really helped me out. And he's talking about more than just helping out his back pain. He helped him out through some other medical issues that he had. And so in my lack of sleep and my anxiety, I said, all right, fine, I'll go to dinner with him. And I took the chiropractor's number. I called him up, set up a dinner date for the Tuesday coming. And Tuesday rolls around, get home from work, and I tell Allison I'm going to cancel. What's this guy going to, it's a waste of my time. And she said, you can't do that. That's, it's too late. You need to go. And she told me to be nice on the way out the door. So I went and had dinner with him, and he was talking about using vitamins and minerals and herbs and how he treats his patients, to treat all these difficult medical conditions. And, he's telling me stories about their improvements with these treatments. And either he's lying or, hey, there's other therapies out there I wasn't taught. And, him and I hit a friendship right off the bat, which helped tremendously. But he was also talking to me about functional biochemistry and physiology. Now, I learned biochemistry and physiology in medical school. I learned it in my undergrad. You learn it, multiple times. But the biochemistry you learn in medical school it's almost like you memorize the equations to get the test right, and then you forget it when it's gone. You don't learn any function to it. There's no real world application to it. You're just learning these chemical names and these reactions that are supposed to be occurring. and you pass the test and you move on. You don't really think about it after that. So the chiropractor's name was Dr. Robert Radke. We became, best buddies after that and shared a lot of patients together. And he brought a book to that meeting, and the book was Healing with Nutrition by Jonathan Wright, who was an allopathic physician. I took that book home from that meeting. I was all excited, and I read it till late at night. And I remember reading till about 2 a.m. I had to work the next day, and I was really excited. I get to work the next day, and I start telling the other doctors there, I met this chiropractor. I think he knows more biochemistry than I ever learned. And, I read this book, half of this book last night, and there's, so much more we could be doing with our patients. And, I was met with, they were family doctors. So family doctors are generally pretty nice, but the eyes were clearly uninterested. Right. And so I called my dad in the office that day, and I said, I'd like you to stop in after work. Let me draw a couple of blood tests on you from what I read that night. And I drew his thyroid hormone levels, and I drew his testosterone levels. And when I got the blood work back 3 days later, his thyroid levels, which no one had bothered to check anything but a TSH up to that point, his inactive and active thyroid levels, T4 and T3, were really low in the reference range. And when I looked at it, he clearly wasn't activating his thyroid hormone from inactive to active thyroid hormone, T4 into T3. And his testosterone levels were below detectable limits in the lab testing. So they were so low, the lab was reading at less than whatever the lowest point they could read, near zero. No one had bothered to check that. So I put my dad on two things. I put him on natural thyroid hormone and natural testosterone, a cream that he rubbed on. And within 7 days, his 20-year history of angina went away, never returned. I checked his blood work 30 days later, and his cholesterol in the 300s on all this medication to control it fell below 200 without changing any of his bad habits. Mm-hmm. And trust me, my dad had as bad habits eating as anyone out there. More importantly, he lost that pale, pasty look to his face. He pinked up. He looked good. Some of my mother's friends were asking her, what's Ellis doing? He looks better, and, she was telling one of the friends who, one of my dad's best friends, and telling the wife, and all of a sudden, I get a call a couple days later from her saying, I want this for my husband. What did you do for him? And so when I saw the changes in my dad, I knew that's what I wanted to do in medicine. I went to the partners in the practice and said, I need to leave. I'm not going to be a partner. And they were shocked. And they said, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm going to go do holistic medicine. And they said, how are you going to do that? And I'm like, I don't know. They said, why don't you just do it here? And I'm like, no, I need to be in my own office. I wanted everybody on the same page in my office. I want the people answering the phones, the nurses, the doctors, whatever, all sort of trying to do the same thing and on the same team. And so that's where I started. And since then, every patient that comes to me, every new patient that comes to me gets a full hormonal nutritional evaluation, and they get a full thyroid and sex hormone evaluation as well, since that's the first thing I started with my dad. And, I wrote a book about that, and my dad was a part of that book. And, it's a Miracle of Natural Hormones. That was the first book I wrote in 1998. And, I just had my 16th book coming out very soon, a holistic approach to viruses. We have it out now. I just haven't publicized it yet because we're redoing our website. It's a much better way to practice medicine. It's a much holistic way is the way to go. In my view, it supports the immune system. It supports the body, makes people healthier. And, no longer did I feel I didn't want to practice medicine anymore. And, I'm almost 30 years into it and still enjoying what I do.
Oh, that's amazing. So I just want to make sure everybody can get your books by going to your website, drbrownstein.com.
My books are available at drbrownstein.com. The virus book, they got a call right now until we get it up there. We've just had some website issues lately, but it'll be up within a couple of weeks.
Yep. Awesome. I can't wait to pick it up, right? Because our family here, we pretty much, we don't go to a doctor unless there's some major problem. Like my son had to have his appendix out, or there's an accident, or any of those type of things. So I can't wait to see the book and see what's in there. You talked about, this, and I was going to ask you about who your first patient was, because I knew it was your dad, and that's an amazing story. And that's how I got your start. And so do you combine the two now, the two different types of medicine, or do you mainly are doing the holistic or functional style?
Well, look, medical school, I use the basic model I was taught in medical school. I take a history on a patient, I listen to them and, ask them questions. I do a physical exam, and then I order laboratory tests, and then you try and formulate a diagnosis plan and a treatment plan. And, that's the basic model I was taught in medical school. It works. And, that model works. What didn't work for me was to just have drugs in my toolbox and nothing else. Drugs that, 99% of which poison enzymes or block receptors in the body. And, when you look at the human physiology and biochemical pathways, we were not meant to have our enzymes poisoned and our receptors blocked for the long term. Now, having said that, there's a time and a place to do those things. If you're having an acute heart attack, there's no better place to be in the middle of an acute heart attack than an emergency room where the doctors are skilled at treating acute heart attacks. Our mortality from heart disease has gone down dramatically over the last 40 years because we're better at treating it. And similarly, if you have pneumonia, I think the treatment for pneumonia, bacterial pneumonia, should be antibiotics directed against the bacterial infection in your lungs. So, conventional medicine, as you mentioned with your son, you have an appendicitis. The best treatment for, an acute appendicitis with an infectious component to it is surgery and get it out. It saves lives. So there's a lot to conventional medicine that's good. There's a lot that's not so good. And, what's not so good is the treatment of chronic disease. And nowhere in my medical training was I taught what is health and how to maintain it. I was taught about pathology, how to diagnose it, and how to prescribe the one drug to treat it. Now, there's a use for that. Just as I said, if you have pneumonia, try and figure out what's the infectious organism and use the antibiotic to treat it. But there's also a use to how do you support the immune system? How do you build the immune system up so if they get pneumonia, they're not as sick? Or even if they have pneumonia, they can recover quicker along with the antibiotic. So I use both, and that's why I say I use the best of both worlds.
Right. You don't know that Director of Food and Beverage at the hospital 3 years and 4 days. 3 years and 4 days for me. And it was the same thing, right? I referred to it as I worked at a repair shop. It wasn't really like a scenario where, you probably know this, right? People who are in the hospital for heart disease, they're not allowed to have a diet that has high cholesterol or high sodium in and things like that. So the doctor prescribes them a diet, but then they're getting margarine that has trans fats and peanut butter that has trans fats, and they're getting all these things that aren't healthy for them food-wise. And so it was a very, very difficult time for me because here I at least understood from all my research that, we can control what goes in and on our body. And because they have heart disease doesn't mean that we should give them trans fat and give them cancer, right? In the short run, right? And so it was a very, very tough time for me to work there.
No, I remember when my mother was in the hospital for, a bowel issue. And, I go to visit her and sitting with her, and they bring her dinner, and the dinner was horrendous. It was full of hydrogenated fats and just terrible food. And so I took a picture of it and I did a blog post of it. And I remember getting a lot of comments on that blog post. And, here she is sick in the hospital and she's trying to heal, and they're giving her this food that blocks healing. And, it was ridiculous. And so, look, the main reason I started writing books and writing my newsletter and, blog posts, years ago is because I want to educate people so they can make better choices. You can listen to me, you can listen to others and make your best choice. The best decision maker of any medical condition is the patient. And I think when they're presented with the right information and the right, description of, should you eat good food or should you not eat, should you eat lousy food, I think they'll make the better decision. And, the best patient is the educated patient. That's why I started writing those books years ago.
Absolutely. It's kind of the same thing when you're buying a car. Right now, you can see what the invoice price is on a car, and you can negotiate better. Where like doctors had all the information, the car dealership had all the information, and now we're able to arm ourselves as we go in. I want to move into iodine, and then we can move into salt, and then and weave into these questions we've had from the listeners as well. And I know that I've listened to a lot of talks and podcasts and things like that. I know that you don't even test people for iodine anymore because 97% of the 7,000 patients that you and your partners have tested have come in deficient. So iodine, how do we lose miss the boat on iodine to where we're also deficient in our country and maybe even into other parts of the world?
Well, the iodine story in conventional medicine is very interesting. The iodine story in Dr. Brownstein's world is also, well, it's interesting to me. I don't know if it's interesting to anyone else, but I'll give you my take on it. Iodine was discovered in the 1800s, and it was quickly, maybe the early 1900s, but it was quickly figured out that you need iodine for thyroid function. And what happened was one of the first observational studies on iodine were miners who went into a silver mining site in South America. And then when they drank the water, if they had a goiter or swollen thyroid, the goiter would go away. So the scientist who wrote about it, I think his name was Courtois. He did analysis of the mine and the water and the salt in the mine, and he found it was the iodine and the salt of the mine that was getting in the water that was making this swollen thyroid go away. So he wrote an article and said anyone with a swollen thyroid or goiter should use iodine either in water or in salt. Now, that triggered, the findings in the U.S. from the early 20th century when goiter was epidemic. So people were walking around with swollen thyroids across the whole country in the early 20th century. And it was occurring at huge rates around the Midwest United States, which is where I live. Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, all the states that surround the Great Lakes. The soil there is one of the most iodine deficient areas of the world. It's been known for close to 100 years that that's the case. And so there was a huge goiter epidemic in people, and it wasn't just in people, it was in animals. So it was in farm animals, and there was a worry from the highest levels of our government at that time that as the population of the U.S. expanded from east to west, that we were going to outstrip the food supply available to us. They weren't going to be able to grow enough animals for us to eat the eggs and eat the meat and whatever else we needed. And they were worried about a catastrophe happening where we would outstrip the available food supply because they couldn't get the farm animals to procreate correctly and to grow to the right size. Mm-hmm. So there was a doctor in outside of Cleveland who wrote an article in medical school about iodine, and it came to the reaches of the U.S. government, and they tasked him with doing a study on animals to figure out how much iodine animals need to grow correctly and procreate correctly. And so he did a study where he put different amounts of iodine in the animal feed, and he figured out the lowest amount of iodine needed in the animal feed. The animals would now procreate correctly and grow to the right size. So he wrote it up, and the government, extrapolated those findings to humans and said, okay, here's the amount of iodine and salt that we can put in salt at the minimum amount, and let's see if this takes away goiter. So he did the study, of course I'm on camera right now, so I'm blocking out his name. He did the study on humans in Ohio, repeated it in Michigan, and what he found was that a small amount of iodine and iodized salt, helped decrease goiter rates in adolescent girls, 80%. And so the U.S. government, from that point on, recommended iodized salt for the rest of the United States. And it was really the first public health miracle ever seen in the U.S. And goiter rate went down. Animals procreated appropriately. They grew to the right size. And, here we are. So the interest in iodine kind of fell after that because people weren't walking around with goiters anymore. So, the mainstream medical thought at the time was, well, that's it. We've solved the iodine problem. We don't need to do any more. And that thought process has persisted 100 years later. That was in the 1920s that happened. So doctors really, I remember in medical school, I was taught extremely little about iodine. And what I was taught was iodine deficiency is a thing of the past. Iodized salt has corrected it. Nobody needs iodine. If you give people iodine, you're going to precipitate a thyroid problem or make an existing thyroid problem worse. Mm-hmm. So, here I start my holistic practice with those thoughts in mind. And I remember I treated my dad with thyroid hormone. I diagnosed a thyroid problem that was part of his heart history, since we know that low thyroid can cause heart disease. And, no one had bothered to do a full thyroid analysis till I did it on him. And so every patient after that got a full thyroid analysis. And I was diagnosing thyroid problem after thyroid problem after thyroid problem in my patients. In fact, first 10 years of my practice, I would estimate I probably had 3/4 of my patient practice on thyroid hormone. Well, it was bothering me at that time. Why do so many people need thyroid hormone? So I would look at the physiology of the thyroid gland and look at what cofactors are needed to make thyroid hormone and to activate thyroid hormone. And things like selenium and magnesium and vitamin A and iodine come into play when you look at all these pathways. And so I would put people on these items. I would test for them, and if they were low, I'd put them on selenium and iodine and magnesium and other things. And what I found was nothing worked as well as thyroid hormone. And in regards to iodine, I became interested in iodine at that time because the highest concentration of iodine is in the thyroid gland. You can't make thyroid hormone without iodine. Thyroid hormone is labeled depending on how many iodine atoms are attached to it. For example, thyroxine or T4, the 4 means there's 4 iodine atoms attached to it. Triiodothyronine, T3, means there's 3 iodine atoms attached to it. So you can't make thyroid hormone without iodine. In fact, you can't make any hormone without iodine. All the other glands require iodine to make hormones. But in regards to the thyroid, so here I am trying iodine in my patients who I have on thyroid hormone. I'm trying low doses, medium doses, high doses, and it's not working. They didn't get worse. They just didn't get better. They still needed the thyroid hormone. And so this went on for about 10 years. I would try iodine, I'd get frustrated with it, and I'd move away from it. Then I read an article in one of my holistic journals written by Dr. Guy Abraham. He was a gynecologist in California who was just doing nutritional therapies. And so he wrote an article saying that he had developed an iodine loading test. And it was a little blip, maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs long. I became interested in it because there was no great iodine testing at that time that you could use. And I kind of felt like, well, gee, Michigan soil is supposed to be one of the lowest iodine containing soils in the world. How come people have enough iodine? Here I am diagnosing them low salt. I mean, it's not, I don't think they're all thyroid patients, but why isn't iodine working? So I called Dr. Abraham. That's a whole other story there. But after a few phone calls, after I got him to trust me enough to talk to me, he started educating me on iodine. And what I realized was I was using the wrong form of iodine. We started collaborating at that point. He became interested in my practice because of where it was located and in the middle of the goiter belt of the United States. We started testing my patients from the test that he designed. And, we worked together with a couple other doctors to refine the test. And, lo and behold, I find over 96 to 97% of patients are, severely low in iodine. When I started using the right form of iodine, which is a combination of iodine and iodide, where I was just using one of those 2 forms before, my patients started getting better. They didn't need thyroid hormone anywhere near I was prescribing it. I went from 75% of my practice on thyroid hormone to now probably about 20%, 15 to 20%. And most importantly, they're feeling better. And, iodine's more important. It has importance other than just the thyroid gland, which we can get into too, if you'd like.
Right. Well, it's just basically all the glands, right? Prostate, all those different glands that need. So how much, a big question maybe is how much does people need in a day, right? For all the glands requirement.
So iodine is needed for all the glands of the body, the ovaries, uterus, breast, prostate, pancreas, and salivary glands. And, these glands produce hormones, and you can't produce a hormone without iodine. You can't produce saliva without iodine. And so, what are we having problems with in our country right now? We're having 1 in 7 women diagnosed with breast cancer, 1 in 3 men diagnosed with prostate cancer. Thyroid cancer is the fastest growing cancer. Pancreatic cancer growing at epidemic rates. Uterine cancer growing at epidemic rates. I think I hit most of those glands. Right. And so the glands of the body need iodine. In fact, they concentrate iodine against the gradient. that's an ATP or an energy dependent process. So they need energy. They need energy molecules to be able to move iodine from a high concentration in the bloodstream to a lower concentration in the glands and switch that. And you want a higher concentration in the glands versus the bloodstream. So your question of how much, iodine do people need, everyone's a unique biochemical individual, but a general rule in our society right now, in our modern 2020 world, our iodine requirements have gone up over the years compared to our predecessors, compared to our grandparents, our great-grandparents, and great-great-grandparents. And the reason the iodine requirements have gone up is because we're exposed to more and more toxic halides. Iodine's part of the halide family on the periodic table. That includes fluoride, bromide, chlorine, and iodine. So the halides are all they're all known as competitive inhibitors of one another, meaning if you get too much of one halide, it can throw out the other one. So iodine can get thrown off by overexposure to bromide and fluoride. And so our exposure to the toxic halides, bromide and fluoride, have gone up, exponentially compared to what our previous generations, grandparents, great-grandparents, and so on have been exposed to. And it's mostly from our high-tech consumer society. Talking to you on my laptop right now, it's full of bromide. The chair I'm sitting on I'm sure the cushion is full of bromide. Mattresses are full of bromide. Fluoride's in our water supply, and we get too much fluoride. So this is elevated our iodine requirements because it's lowered our iodine levels. So right now, I would say, most patients of mine are on 25 milligrams of a combination of iodine and iodide. But if they have a glandular problem, breast problem, ovary, uterus, prostate, pancreas, they need more. And, people with cancer of those tissues generally need more.
Right. Like recommended daily allowance, I guess the FDA, 150 micrograms for non-pregnant women and 120 micrograms for pregnant women. And another interesting piece, and I put this in my show on Wednesday when I talked about my experience of being dedicated to taking Lugol's for Lugol's iodine, was the average Japanese person gets about 13 milligrams just from their diet because they eat a lot of seaweed, and they're obviously not in a goiter belt because they're on an island and those type of things, and because there's iodine in the ocean and those things. And so it's, I had read somewhere a couple of things, is that there's also bromide in things like Mountain Dew, and I used to drink like a 6-pack of Mountain Dew a day when I was in my late teens, early 20s, before I found coffee. And it's now a dough conditioner, so it's in a lot of breads, right? And so bromide is everywhere, fluoride is everywhere. And then also, you probably heard me mention in the intro that both of my parents had cancer. My dad had prostate cancer. My mom had uterine cancer, and she had to have a hysterectomy at age 55 because of the cancer she had. And so there's so many things packed in there. And so I think before we start getting into questions that from our listeners, I think it's really interesting that people need to know that that if you're low on iodine, these other halides are going to block the reception of iodine when you do first start taking it. So if you can talk about iodine, the receptors being blocked by bromide or other halides.
So you're correct. You're correct on how much the Japanese ingest daily. I'm assuming you got that from my book, and very impressed to remember the actual numbers. And that took a lot of work. Dr. Abraham and I did an interview with the health minister of Japan to come up with those numbers. And so the Japanese ingest over 100 times more iodine than we do on a daily basis just in their food. And the RDA for iodine is set at 150 micrograms, as you stated. That RDA was set in the 1920s to prevent goiter in humans. It's the minimum amount of iodine which does that. And that's still true today. I mean, it is a pretty effective minimal amount to prevent goiter in most people. But it's not enough. It's not the optimal amount. So the Japanese ingest about 100 times more than we do. And, I was talking about 200 times more, and, my average dose of 25 milligrams instead of 12 milligrams. Right. But, it also goes to, we should eat organic foods. We should eat, get rid of bread products that contain bromine. And, bromine is in food and drink, as you said, and, we got fluoride all over the public water supplies. So you should be drinking filtered water that removes fluoride, which requires a special filter to do that. All this can be done, especially if you work with a holistic practitioner who's knowledgeable about this stuff. And of course, here I am rambling, and I forgot what your question was.
I don't even remember what the question was either. Let's see what we're talking about. Oh, it was about if you're deficient on iodine, how other halides can block the reception.
Yes.
Yep.
So they're all competitive inhibitors of one another. It's a chemical term, meaning too much bromine can cause your body to release too much iodine. And the other hand, if you take more iodine, you can get your body to release bromide. So what can happen with people who are full of these toxic halides, bromide and fluoride, when they start taking iodine, they can go through a detoxification reaction, and sometimes some of them don't feel so well. So done appropriately, that segues into my book on salt. And what I find is when I put people on iodine, as long as I make sure their salt levels are up, and I can tell you from doing chemistries on people for over 25 years, the vast majority of people are deficient in salt. They don't get enough salt in their diet. I know we're told to lower our salt intake all the time. That's just not true when you look at the chemistries of people. We're not optimal levels of salt. So then there's good salt and bad salt. So there's refined salt and unrefined salt. And refined salt is Morton salt. It's white, it's thin, it can go through little thin holes and get it to your food. The unrefined salt is thicker and it's got color to it. The color is the mineral part of it. So an unrefined salt could have over 80 minerals in it. And good unrefined salts include Redmond's Real Salt and Celtic brand sea salt and Himalayan salt. I've had all three brands tested 4 times. They all tested without toxicity. There's a little difference in mineral content, but they're all pretty good. If Morton salt has no minerals in it. It's the refining process removes the minerals out of it. So I don't think that's a good salt to use. So one of the ways you get away with, there's the picture of Redmond's Real Salt. Right. One of the ways that you get rid of side effects with iodine is to take more salt, and I frequently put my patients on salt. I wrote a book, Salt Your Way to Health, because the common wives' tale out there is we all need to lower our salt intake because it raises blood pressure. It's just not true. Yes, there are some salt-sensitive people that happens to. And if you have congestive heart failure, you have to watch salt. If you have kidney failure, you have to be careful because the kidneys can't filter out enough salt. For the rest of us, you need adequate amounts of salt. Salt's the second major constituent in the body next to water. We have no stores of salt. And, either we get it in adequate amounts or we're deficient. And from my testing of thousands of patients over 25 years, the vast majority are deficient in salt.
Well, I say this, right? I actually live in Utah, where Redmond is mine, the Real Salt. And I know the owner, Brett Roberts, and I've actually interviewed to work for the company years ago when I was at the hospital, because he had a small chain of 3 different health food stores that have raw milk in them, has their Real Salt, has their bentonite clay in it, all type of things. And how we met and how you ended up on the show was I had Daryl Bushard from Redmond on the show, and he introduced us. And I want to say, give a shout out to Daryl. Thanks for introducing us and putting this together there. And I'm also an affiliate for Redmond, and so I'll put a link in all the episodes. So if you're interested in buying Redmond Real Salt, you can help support the show and do those things. And I also encourage you to go buy the books from Dr. Brownstein there. And so let's ask a couple questions from the listeners here. One came from Wednesday, and it was from what's her name? Laura Krippner. She wanted me to ask you about the connection between iodine and Hashimoto's disease.
So Hashimoto's disease is an autoimmune problem of the thyroid gland, where the body is producing antibodies that are attacking the thyroid gland. So it's an inflammatory condition. It's occurring at epidemic rates right now. It wasn't very common when I started off, in my career 30 years ago, but it's commonplace now, and it's occurring at younger and younger ages. It occurs in women more than men. So there's a myth out there that taking iodine if you have Hashimoto's disease is going to worsen it, and I've seen this myth propagated by conventional doctors, and it's propagated by holistic healthcare practitioners. And so, those who say that iodine causes Hashimoto's disease should simply answer this question for me, or this statement for me. If you look at the incidence of Hashimoto's disease over the last 30 years, it's gone up dramatically. If you look at the iodine intake of Americans over the last 30 years, it's gone down over 50%, according to National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey data from the Department of HHS. And so as our iodine levels have declined, Hashimoto's degrees have increased. That's a negative correlation. Now, a negative correlation disproves causation from that substance. That simple fact disproves that iodine is causing this rapid rise in Hashimoto's disease. In fact, it's iodine deficiency that sets the stage for Hashimoto's disease to form. And I have a chapter on this dedicated to this in my book. And so I treat my patients with Hashimoto's disease with iodine. What I find is if they're young, below about the age of 35, you can get Hashimoto's disease to resolve and to have no signs of it. I've got two girls, two daughters, and my wife made the diagnosis of Hashimoto's disease because I do it every day. I just couldn't see it when I got home. We're having dinner one night. They were about 10 and 11 years old. And she says to me, my wife says at dinner, do you think the girls have a thyroid problem? And I look up to her, and before I say anything, she goes, they're complaining of headaches. They're tired all the time. And, she goes, you got this all through your books. What do you think? And I stop eating, and I look at her, and I'm like, I tap myself on the forehead like the V8 commercial. I'm like, I think you're onto something there. And so I test their blood, and both of them have Hashimoto's disease. Mm-hmm. And so, I had them on a little bit of iodine at that point, and I markedly upped their iodine. Also cleaned up some things in their diet. They were sensitive to gluten and dairy. And, we corrected some nutritional deficiencies, which we were already doing. And right now, my eldest daughter, Haley, has no signs of Hashimoto's disease. She's in her mid-20s and doing her residency in medicine. And my fourth-year medical student, Jessie, has almost no signs of Hashimoto's on her blood testing. It's very slight. And I have no doubt, and I followed them after I raised their iodine levels, and you can see the Hashimoto's titers come down. And that's what I experienced with my patients. Now, for the older patients over the age of 35, when I diagnose it, you can get Hashimoto's to go away about 50% of the time. The other 50% of the time, they can maintain antibody titers against the thyroid, but they're usually at least 50 to 75% lower than they were when they started. So I find iodine a big help for patients. There's only one real contraindication to iodine. It's someone who has an autonomously functioning nodule. It means they have a little nodule somewhere on their thyroid that is not, it's lost, the thyroid gland has lost control of it. It's on its own. So if you give iodine to those patients, that nodule will soak up the iodine and make a lot of thyroid hormone, and they'll get hyperthyroid really fast. Mm-hmm. Those are few and far between. After doing this work for 20 plus years now, I have, 5 patients or so that have had this. And in those patients, either you stop iodine or they have surgery to remove that nodule, and they can't take iodine until they remove the nodule, but that's it. And, I treat Graves patients with iodine. The vast majority of Graves patients recover, get over it, and don't have symptoms of it afterwards. So, I think it's a wives' tale that's propagated in both holistic and conventional circles. It has no basis in scientific fact.
Got it. Another question. Super wealth of knowledge. The value you bring is amazing. We had a question from Sia from Facebook here. She says, and I'll put this up. What do you recommend for someone with no thyroid because of radiation? It isn't quite cutting it.
That's a good question from Debbie. So what I would say to Debbie and what I say to my patients is, okay, you don't have a thyroid. The highest concentration of iodine in the body is in the thyroid, but the highest amount of iodine is actually in the muscles and the skin of the body. So I'm assuming, Debbie, you have muscles and you have skin and you have brain and you have ovaries and you have uterus and you have heart and lungs and things like that. All those tissues need iodine as well. And just because you don't have a thyroid doesn't mean you don't need iodine. In fact, the thyroid holds a very small percentage of the total body iodine load. So I don't really adjust my doses of iodine, whether they've had thyroid gland surgically or radiologically removed or not. So I treat them, part of the reason Synthroid might not be cutting it is because you might be lacking iodine. And, in my first 10 years of my practice, I found the natural desiccated thyroid hormone works much better than Synthroid. This comes from a porcine or pig-derived thyroid, which is the closest we can get to human thyroid. And I still use that today. But I can tell you without a doubt that once I started using iodine, it didn't matter quite as much which form of thyroid medication patient was on or I prescribed. They could do well with Synthroid, they could do well with natural thyroid hormone. So that might be one of the reasons you're having problems, with your Synthroid and getting it regulated appropriately.
Okay, that's all. Do we have a Scott Cooper? I'm staying on the front here with Denise Washlow. She has a question, and it says, "Is iodine absorbed in the skin? For instance, my wrist, rubbing them together. Is that an effective way to add iodine to the body?"
Another good question, Denise. So there was a study that I quote in my book where, there's an old, unfortunately it's a wives' tale too, that you can just put iodine on the skin, it'll absorb through the skin, and you don't need to take it orally. Now, if you read about iodine, you'll find the iodine skin test where you paint it on the skin somewhere, and then you look for how long it takes for the brown iodine color to go away. And the quicker it goes away, the more you assume the skin absorbed it faster because the body needed more of it, and the more deficient you were. The problem with all that is it doesn't hold true when you look at some scientific literature. There's a clear study where they painted iodine in the skin, and they found that 88% evaporated off into a vapor, not to be absorbed in the body. So you can absorb some iodine that way, but it's not, the best way to do it is to take it orally. And, I can attest to that through my practice. Skin is not the best way to do it. In fact, the skin holds about 20% of the body's iodine. So perhaps if you're putting it on the skin, that's maybe where it'll store, but it's really not the best way to get it for the rest of the body. The best way is to do it orally.
And that's how I did my coffee this morning, with a little salt in there too. So, that's how I did it. So, so the next question is Scott Kusman. This actually came in this morning about 15 minutes before we went live, and it's a different subject. But he says he's a big fan of Dr. B. You got him started on high dose iodine back in 2007. It reduced his salt phobia as well. If there's time, he would like to hear your thoughts on James Cameron's new movie about being a vegan, which is called The Game Changers. I don't know if you've seen the movie, but I just wanted to ask the question.
I didn't see the movie, but I can tell you I do not prescribe iodine generally without putting people on salt. You mentioned salt, right?
Well, he reversed. Well, what happened is that he's a big fan of you. He started using high dose iodine back in 2007, and he had a phobia about salt. So it was because of, I guess, maybe your book, or maybe he was a patient. I don't know. The reverse. Wanted to get your opinion on the movie, The Game Changers.
So unfortunately, I haven't seen the movie, but I can tell you that I love hearing that story of someone just reading what I've written or seeing me lecture and they're trying something and it made a difference in them. Look, I've been practicing holistic medicine for 28 years, I think it is, and the biggest bang for the buck that I have seen over these 28 years, there's nothing even come close to it. It's iodine. It's inexpensive. It affects, every single cell in the body. It balances hormones. It detoxes the body. It helps the brain function better. The body can't live without it, and any cell can't live without it. So if there's one thing, if the government takes away everything we do holistically and leaves me one choice of one thing that I can do, it would be iodine. And, it's the most improvement that I see with my patients. And that occurs on a daily basis. And that's been over 28 years.
Right. Well, I have more questions. She was the one to ask the question about that she wants to know, how will iodine be ingested? And I know the answer to that is no, there's a specific type of iodine. So if you
Yeah, now it can't all be ingested. And so you want oral iodine. And, Lugol's solution was developed by Dr. Lugol in the 1800s, Dr. Lugol in the 1800s. And that's for oral ingestion. And, I use 5% Lugols in my practice. And that one drop provides 6.25 milligrams of a combination of iodine and iodide. I find this very effective, and, it's cheap. It used to be sold over the counter. It's harder to find now because the FDA has banned its sale over the counter. But you can still find iodine over the counter. Liquid iodine, you can find it in 2%. You just double the drops to get to 6.25. From 1 to 2 drops, you get close to that. And just if you're going to use iodine, just make sure it's an oral. It's designed for oral ingestion.
Right. It's not the one you can buy at the pharmacy that you would put on a cut. I mean, it's a different type. Right?
That's correct.
So Debbie, I will put a link to the one that I buy, and so you can have that. So because Lugol's iodine is actually the one that I use as well. So there. So there's a couple things. One is there's a study, and I found this from, I don't know if you heard of Dr. Stephen Finney, but I'm a keto diet person. I've been in keto for 5 years. And that has to do with the fact that I do the Wim Hof method, and I live at 7,000 feet in the mountains. We got a foot of snow yesterday, or almost a foot of snow here. And so I crave fat when I go out into the cold and all those type of things. But, one of the things Dr. Stephen Finney talks about is he references a study that how much salt we need a day is almost 5 grams of sodium a day, right? And you probably have seen this. No news to you, but I love the fact that you talk about salt as we are salt deficient, right? Because so here's the thing, iodine's in salt, we do not eat a lot of salt, so we're iodine and salt deficient at the same time. So it's really this, double-edged sword. The message we're getting is different than that. So can you talk about salt as we're in the closing minutes here a little bit?
So as I mentioned before, salt is the second major constituent in the body next to iodine. I've been checking blood chemistries for 30 years in my practice, 20 years holistically, 28 and a half years or so holistically. The reference ranges for salt are like the reference ranges for magnesium or vitamin C. Reference range does not mean normal range, does not mean optimal range. It just means the one standard deviation from the median of, a group of people they tested. So what's happened over the years is our nutrient levels have declined. If you looked at the reference range for magnesium, it was much higher 20, 30 years ago than it is now. Now, just because you're in a reference range doesn't mean it's optimal. So optimal salt ranges include a sodium of greater than 140 milliequivalents per liter and chloride of 105 milliequivalents per liter. I talk about this in my salt book. When I look through the literature on salt, the literature that we need to reduce salt to reduce blood pressure is just not, it's really not there. There is, I mentioned those groups of people before that should limit their salt intake. Those are the vast minority of us. And the vast majority of us need salt. If you're active, I find thin, active people generally seem to need more salt. If you're sweating, you need more salt. And we don't have stores of salt, so we got to take it on a daily basis. And so the good thing with salt is salt can help to detoxify bromide and fluoride in the body. So when you take iodine, if you start displacing bromide and fluoride that need to come out, you have enough salt, there's much less chance of getting a detox reaction with that. So generally as a rule, like a teaspoon of Redmond's salt a day, is fine, or any other unrefined salt. And then you need to limit refined salt because it's lacking the minerals and it'll leave you mineral deficient.
Wow. There's another thing to talk about as well, iodine, and I know is like, obviously they worked here. We figured out how much salt to put in our iodine. Detox is such a big thing in our modern world. Iodine actually can help with detoxing. So, how does that work together?
Well, when someone's iodine deficient, in our world, you can almost guarantee they're iodine deficient because they have too much bromide and fluoride in their body. So when you give them iodine, they're going to start detoxing bromide and fluoride, and that needs to come out. If their detoxification capabilities isn't up to snuff, they're going to get sick from that. they can get things like acne, hair loss, oily skin, irritable, and or they can, there's other problems associated with it. But generally, if they have enough salt coming in at the same time they're taking iodine, that stuff should not happen. And of course, there's other factors with this. It's taking enough water, making sure you drink enough water, eating the right foods and healthy foods, and keeping your mineral levels up and your vitamin levels up to snuff, and optimizing things. And that's what I try and do with my patients. I work with them to optimize their chemistry and their biochemistry. And when you do that, we supply the body with the raw materials it needs. It can do wonderful things and keep us healthy.
Yeah. It's that's where I really started doing the research on salt, because when I started taking iodine, I felt great for like the first 2 months. And then in my mid 40s, this was about 3 years ago, I did this, 45, I got acne all on my forehead. And I noticed that if I brought my doses down a little bit, my acne would go down. And so I was playing with my iodine dosage to figure out exactly how much I needed to keep the acne out, because that's not really fun to have, right? So I've actually experienced that firsthand myself. It's, with that. We got one more question. This will be the last one, and then we'll wrap it up from here. This is from Elaine, and it says, how do you recommend approaching a doctor about testing past the regular blood panels when they disagree? When I took myself off the meds, they had me on this long list of autoimmune issues, which I started after my Hep C treatment.
Well, Elaine, what I would say is find a new doctor. Find one who's willing to work with you where you're at, and find a holistic doctor. They should be knowledgeable about this. Doctor's not willing to do what you're in charge of your own healthcare decisions. If a doctor's not willing to work with you, then it's time to find a new one. I think that's an easy answer to that question.
Yep. That's awesome. Well, Dr. Brownstein, this has been an absolute amazing show. So much information. And I want to thank all the people who asked questions, all the listeners and watchers of the show, which made it a very unique show, right? Because I had 16 other questions to ask you. We didn't even get to those. So at some point, we'll maybe have to bring you back on and we can go down that road again. So
let's do it again.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, again, if anybody wants a book, 16th book is coming out. Got 15 other books on the site, drbrownstein.com. And if you're looking for some coaching from someone like me, my name is Scott Stanfield. I'm the Modern Longevitarian. We're just at an hour here, and I know we've got other things going on, so we're going to wrap it up. It's time to roll our credits. So again, Dr. Brownstein, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure.